We've got to recognize that the recession of democracy is a phenomenon, and then the international rule of law is in retreat as well.
David Miliband, once a politician, now leading one of the world's largest aid organizations.
We need to save lives.
I think the elephant in the room in this conversation is the United States.
What comes to my mind is that the US was the anchor of the global system. Didn't mean that it played a role in every part of it, didn't mean that it got everything right, but it was the anchor, and the anchor's been pulled up avowedly.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. I know there's never been an easy time to run an aid agency, but this particular moment feels especially charged. There are millions of people around the world in need, and at the same time, powerful governments are cutting back on their giving. That's the world that David Miliband has to navigate every day. He's been running the International Rescue Committee for more than a decade now. It is a New York-based organization. It works in the US and across the globe. And he came to the job as a politician. He'd been Britain's foreign secretary, the country's top diplomat, seen as a future prime minister. And then in 2010, he had a shock when, in a Labour leadership election, his party chose his brother over him. It's a long time ago now, and he has built a new career with energy and passion, as you'll hear. But his old friends in Labour are now in power in the UK, and that government, like others, is cutting back on foreign aid. So, obviously, when he came into the studio in London, I wanted to know how he feels about that. There is British political chat in this conversation, and David Miliband also talks about his old boss, Tony Blair. But I'd also been thinking about his background, about how his parents, both Jewish, had narrow escapes from Nazi-occupied Europe as children. And that's where this conversation begins.
My dad's family story involved a lot of trauma and tragedy, but he came to the UK in 1940, 16-year-old. He became a student. He thought it was ridiculous to be studying in Cambridge instead of fighting fascism, so he joined the Royal Navy. And despite the trauma, and he was not he didn't see himself as a heroic figure in the war effort. There was a lot of talk about it. There was a lot of talk about how his mother and sister survived, a call to report to Brussels railway station, where many of their relatives did and were never seen again.
And he had just got out literally in the last chance to leave Belgium with his father.
He got out in the last chance. His mother and sister were saved effectively by a Catholic family south of Brussels. So on his side, there was more discussion, including of 43 family members that he lost in the Holocaust. On my mother's side, she found it much more difficult to talk about it. In fact, she didn't talk about it.
Didn't she spend much of the war in hiding as a child?
She did.
So she lived through Nazi occupation.
Well, she was younger. So she was born in 1934. My dad was born in 1924. And so for her, hidden in a convent, first of all, hidden then by a family that they knew in Warsaw. So she lost her father in a concentration camp, and her mother sent her just as a 12-year-old to the UK in 1946 on her own.
To stay with who?
To stay as part of a group of Jewish kids who were sent, actually orphan kids.
Start a new life.
Yeah, and I think that for her it was just the trauma was too great. So she didn't talk about it. So I think I once wrote the first refugees I ever met were my parents. And that's the truth. And they did want to give us the security that they didn't have. But there was this slightly bifurcated, one part of the story filled in, another part of the story less filled in. Ironically, when I went to apply to be the CEO of the International Rescue Committee, they said, "Why do you want this job? You're in politics at the moment." I was a backbench MP. I said, well, one, I like really difficult problems, and how you deliver humanitarian aid in Syria between the Assad government, the Russians, branches of Al-Qaeda is a really difficult problem. I'd like to work on difficult problems. Secondly, I said, an organization founded by Albert Einstein in the 1930s, you don't get better shoulders to stand on than that. Founded by Albert Einstein, who'd written letters to Eleanor Roosevelt pleading with her to persuade her husband, the president, to let Jews and others from Europe come into America and failed in that, and so set up the International Rescue Committee really as a response to that. But then thirdly, I said, my parents were both refugees, and so some of the clients of the International Rescue Committee are people who fled across borders, others are still stuck in war zones. And so I felt in some way, I guess I was closing a bit of a circle, helping people of different generation, different religion probably, but whose circumstances I could at least relate to through the experience of my parents.
And it's absolutely understandable that trauma that your mother experienced, that it was very difficult for her to talk about it. Did you just understand that and navigate around it, or do you remember asking her and trying to find out?
I think we must have picked up the vibes, I think. I don't remember doing the equivalent of a Bloomberg or Today program interview trying to pump her for the answers. I mean, her mother was still alive, so I remember my grandmother. But obviously, different people take it in different ways and come through learning different lessons, I guess.
She named you, didn't she, after her father? Your grandfather, your murdered grandfather was David.
Yes, he was David Kozak. And actually, there was a certain element of closure, including for her in 2016, out of the blue. I got an email from a German voluntary historical society saying, we think we've now concluded our work about the Heilfingen concentration camp, and we're convinced that we've now located the records that show that your grandfather was brought here from Auschwitz in November 1944, and he was killed in January 1945. And we've done that for many of those who lost their lives here, and we're going to have a ceremony to mark this place. And so I was able to go with Brother Ed and with my mother and her sister to finally, 60 years later, 70 years later, mark the loss of her father.
How did you feel standing there?
I felt the weight of terrible trauma, really. I mean, I looked at my mother, who was 10 years old when she lost her father. She hadn't seen him for 4 years. And you just think, there but for the grace of God, really. I mean, it's a feeling of the emptiness on one side and the fortune on the other.
And also January 1945, when camps are being liberated elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's
nearly at the end.
Yeah, and it's obviously far from the only story of this kind. So one doesn't want to. One wants to absorb it as a personal story.
But I wonder if do you think about this heritage when you come face to face with people in desperate situations, which you do?
You don't need family heritage for your head and your heart to just bond with that person in a really, I think, profound way. And so I think that I wouldn't want to overplay that. There is one element, though. Whenever any of us grew up, we think what we're experiencing is normal. And I grew up in a relatively middle-class family in the 1970s and 1980s in London, in Leeds. And that seemed like the norm. We lived in a democratic country. We lived in the country of liberties. With all that's going on in the world today, suddenly the period 1945 to 2026 in Western Europe, and certainly the period of the Cold War and the immediate post-Cold War, doesn't look like the norm. It looks like the exception. And so these questions that are being raised by all sorts of people about remembering that it's a narrow corridor, the one between a state that's too strong and is dictatorial and a state that's too weak and you've got anarchy. I was lucky enough to grow up in this narrow corridor.
Well, as it happens, speaking of how the world has changed, I found myself reading back a speech you gave in 2007 when you were British Foreign Secretary. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to read it now, and I'm not doing it in a kind of hindsight is a wonderful thing kind of way.
I hope I had a bit of foresight in there, did I?
There is much to celebrate. You say there are fewer countries at war than ever before, more trade, more travel, more connections around the globe, aspiration unleashed. Do you remember standing there on that stage and feeling like there was so much that Britain could do on the world stage?
Well, I remember standing there. I don't remember what I said in anything like the detail that you... I remember it was the first time I think I'd spoken to Labour Party conference as Foreign Minister. It was still a optimistic time. It was before the financial crisis. It was after the really difficult problems in Iraq. Afghanistan was very difficult, but there was still a feeling. It was after Vladimir Putin's Munich Security Conference speech in February 2007 when he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, So there was the drums were beating. But I think that there was still a sense of a tide of history. Remember, you'd got the enormous wave of democratization of the 1990s, never mind the release of Nelson Mandela and the end of apartheid. And the global system had just united behind the idea of the responsibility to protect, which was the idea if states were oppressing their own citizens, it wasn't just their business, and that state sovereignty was a foundation of the international system.
The age of humanitarian intervention.
So were human rights.
Yeah, of course it wouldn't have been that great. If you were listening to that speech and you were an Iraqi or Afghan civilian at that time.
Of course.
I wonder though, even as you look back and even as we make this contrast, whether you think Mark Carney was right when he, at Davos, talked about the idea of the rules-based international order being partially false. You were at Davos yourself. Yeah. There were always exceptions to this. There was a version of might is right then as well.
Yeah, it was a very significant and very important speech. And I think not just that we should recognize that he was correct to call out that the rules-based order operated with more than, you use the word exceptions, I think that's probably generous. I wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs 2.5 years ago, which said that the Ukraine war had united the West but divided us from the rest. And I asked, why did it divide us from the rest? And the reason was that for the rest, which are democratic countries like India and South Africa and also undemocratic countries, they saw the emphasis on territorial integrity, on sovereignty as being given to and honored in the Ukraine case, but not honored in enough other cases. And there's a range of other ways in which the rules-based order...
including Iraq, I have to say, because I was in South Asia when the all-out invasion of Ukraine took place, and I heard exactly this. Yeah. Your country was part of an invasion.
And of course, two wrongs don't make a right, but still, it's right to say that it was honored in the breach as well as in the observance, the idea of a rules-based order. Now, the question then is, do you want to correct the breaches, or do you want to dispense with the honoring? And I still think that the idea that alongside the rights of states, there are rights of individuals, which was the essential lesson that the post-war pioneers took from the interwar period and from the rest of history, that's still an important lesson.
I think the elephant in the room in this conversation is something directly about the United States. That is the big change, isn't it, in the last year?
Well, it's not the only change. It's the biggest change yet. It's the biggest change in the last year. In the national security strategy that the Trump administration had put out, they talk about themselves as America will no longer be Atlas, quote unquote, propping up the global system. That's not what came to my mind. What comes to my mind is that the US was the anchor of the global system. Didn't mean that it played a role in every part of it. Didn't mean that it got everything right. But it was the anchor, and the anchor's been pulled up avowedly. The Trump administration are very consistent. They said in the campaign, we don't believe in this role for America. But I'm afraid it's not only the US. We've got to recognize that the recession of democracy is a phenomenon such that now there are more autocracies than democracies in the world today. That's significant. And then the international rule of law is in retreat as well. And so the rights that were given to individuals in the UN Charter and in associated conventions are in retreat. And so I think this dual process, both of the international system and domestically, is worth calling out.
And you live in the US, you live in New York, you've made it your home since you began leading the IRC
12 years ago.
12 years ago. What are the conversations you have behind the scenes? Do you have anyone in the Trump administration that you speak to?
Well, we talk to people in and around the administration.
I mean, you yourself.
Yeah.
You've got that kind of access, I imagine.
But I don't want to exaggerate it. We've had a partnership with the US government for a very long time. I think that there's a very strong feeling that they've got a mandate for what they self-describe as a revolution in America's role in the world, where they want to think globally in economics, but they're not going to think globally in politics. They're going to think about the Western Hemisphere in politics. And that's a very big change. And their message is, get used to it. This is the new dispensation.
And what can you say in response? What's the way that you can make the case?
I make the case that it's in the strategic interest as well as the moral interest. If you say to people there are 45 million children under the age of 5 who are acutely malnourished in the world today, there's no one in the Trump administration who says, oh, that's a good thing. I That's not the response that you get. They say we're going to have to find better ways of reaching those people, more efficient ways of reaching those people, more effective ways, more impactful, more innovative ways of reaching those people. And we try and find that landing zone for the conversation we have with them.
And I do want to talk about those ideas because they're obviously very pressing. And I also want to talk about the countries that are on your latest emergency watch list, the crises of 2026. But you mentioned the work that you have done with previous administrations as the International Rescue Committee. A lot of that was around people coming across the southern border and arrangements for them, provision for them. What do you think of the way that ICE has been behaving lately, the way that immigration rules controls are being enforced?
Well, just to be clear, we've been a major partner of the US government on refugee resettlement, which is the organized transfer after very extensive vetting of people from around the world to the US over the last, since the 1980 Refugee Act. And actually, it was Ronald Reagan who admitted more refugees to America on that route than any other president. And that's been stopped. So that partnership is over. That program has been wound up. We do also serve asylum seekers and migrants who've crossed the border. We also have our own staff who have got legal status and then are allowed to work. We don't work in Minnesota, just to be clear. We're in 17 states, but not in the state of Minnesota. So I can't speak to the details of that. What's clearly going on there is that all of the tensions in America are exploding around this issue today. And what I know from the people that we serve and the people that we employ is that they've fled real danger. That's how they've got their asylum claim processed and been given the right to work. And they also are living with a question mark about their own status and whether or not their own story is going to be
good
believed.
Enough.
Yeah. And that creates a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I also want to acknowledge that in the most recent Minnesotan cases, we've been talking about American citizens. The issues in respect of ICE are about American citizens, not just asylum seekers and refugees.
Let's talk then about the countries that you've put on your emergency watch list, like going into this new year, the 10 crises that you think the world
20.
should... Okay, I was looking at the list of the top 10, but clearly they're not the only ones. The two crises you put right at the top, Sudan, the occupied Palestinian territory. I was looking at the complexity of these. One, Sudan being a conflict in which more than 10 other countries are involved. The other one involving the Palestinians being generational. These appear so intractable. Is the only thing you can do to deal with the immediate need rather than have any role in finding the ways to end these?
Yes. I mean, in short, remediation of desperate suffering is our business. Health, water and sanitation, nutrition, livelihoods, protection of women from sexual violence, recovery of women from sexual violence. That's our business. We plead guilty to treating the symptoms. By treating the symptoms, I would add, you can sometimes prevent further destabilization down the road, because the one thing you can guarantee, if you don't tend to humanitarian crisis, it reinforces itself and produces further instability.
But you personally, when you go to these places and you sit with people and you hear their stories, it's such an important part of your work. It gives you that first-hand experience. You then go into places where powerful people are and you can say, I've seen this with my own eyes. But be honest about how it feels to walk away from that. Do you also feel relieved sometimes to be able to walk away?
I mean, actually, my team will tell you, I want to spend more time talking to the clients, because...
The clients being those in need.
The clients being the people in need, yeah. And more time talking to our staff, who are often also in need. So it's
because you're employing people in that group.
Exactly. I mean, we've got 500 people working for us in Sudan. 485 of them are Sudanese. We've got people who used to work for the Bank of Khartoum who are now working for us as humanitarian aid workers. I don't want to sound cheesy about it, but the courage, the tenacity, the ability to laugh sometimes as well as to cry, I mean, that's the most inspiring thing. Someone once said, if you look at the statistics, you get depressed. If you talk to the people, you have hope.
I agree with you. I've seen it as a journalist, but I also know that there is that privilege of being able to walk away. And there are these moments which just make you think, I can't explain why my life is so fundamentally different. Well, it's the luck of the draw.
Total luck of the draw, of course. So you can explain it. I mean,
or I can't deal with it, maybe. That's what I mean. Like, do you grapple with that? Or is it so much a part of your work that this is what you have to do?
You remember the stories, you feel the sense of tragedy. But I'll never forget the first trip I did with the International Rescue Committee was to go and meet Syrian refugees in Jordan. And I went to talk to a group of women, and I couldn't believe it. There was literally, first of all, I was a man going into an all-women's group. They wanted to talk to me. They wanted to cry in front of me. They wanted to tell each of their stories. And I thought, my God, this is, what these people are going through. And then I said to them, do any of you think you'll ever go back to Syria? And suddenly these beaming smiles came through the tears, the sense that they'd not given up. So what conceivable grounds did I have to?
Do you have any idea where that group are now?
Some have gone back to Syria. 1 million people have gone back to Syria. The ones in Jordan, I don't know those specific ones. That there have been returns to Syria from Jordan. Of course, that doesn't mean that you overcome the loss, or you don't then go and find terrible further loss.
Because I've struggled with that part too, keeping up and following the stories of people who you've covered as a journalist. It's like
that's a good point.
Their story their story. You want it in that moment, and then again,
that's a powerful point. And you do ask yourself, what happened to Abdullahi Mohammed, the man I met in Ethiopia, who was working on a water project with us? I mean, you do ask yourself that, and of course you don't know.
Do you know, one foreign correspondent at the BBC once said to me that they had put a child in Afghanistan at the centre of their piece on the then 9 o'clock news. And lots of people wrote into the BBC and said, I really want to help that child. And he wrote back and said, help this organisation if you want to. And people weren't interested. They wanted to help that child, but the idea of a connection to a wider group beyond that didn't resonate in the same way. And you're left with this dilemma. Of course, you need to personalise and put often one person as the face of a bigger problem, but sometimes people don't want to know about the bigger problem. And I guess that's what you grapple with.
Yeah, and I think that our response to that, the late Pope said that the world was suffering from the globalization of indifference, which is a pretty serious charge. I don't know if one's allowed to argue with the Pope, but the sense I have is that people are struggling with how to make a difference, not that they've become indifferent. And I think that this sense of people wanting agency is strong. There can be compassion fatigue. They can think Democratic Republic of Congo is always going to be in crisis. But I think people's sense of humanity is strong, actually. And I think we've ended up in the humanitarian aid or in the aid sector in general talking too much about inputs and not enough about outputs and outcomes. That's what's driving us.
So Gaza, given the number 2 on your watch list, Jared Kushner has set out his plans and his vision for Gaza. What do you think of it?
Well, it would be good if it could happen. And that's the question. And obviously, we have a team of Gazans who are working for us. Their concern at the moment is a long way from what was on the slide. Because people are living in tents. At best. I mean, let's be clear.
What, some people are living in the open air?
Well, the tents have been blown away by the rains. There have been very significant rains. The tents couldn't survive it. The fact that there's a ceasefire is a blessed relief and gives a chance to make inroads on the needs. Although people are still being killed in Gaza, so I don't want to...
More than 400 have been killed
since the ceasefire. So yes, exactly, I was going to say. But nonetheless, it's better to have a ceasefire than not have a ceasefire. The aid deliveries are not yet reaching the level that's promised in phase 1 of the plan that was published.
But just going back to what you said about Jared Kushner's plans, it would be good if they happen. There's a part of what he set out, there's a coastal tourism zone with tower blocks and residential areas. Are you sure that those are for Palestinians?
What was interesting, this is why it's important to go through it, there's obviously a very real concern that at the moment the Israeli Defense Force are more or less down the middle of Gaza, and west of the line is where the Palestinians are. East of the line, there are very few of them. What was actually projected was for the whole of Gaza. The promise to them is that they will have a life that is wholesome and that is connected to the rest of the world and connected to the rest of the Palestinian state, obviously. I think it's so important to be very, very practical about how large is the distance from where we are today to where the vision of a Palestinian should be, because that should drive the most powerful. It's interesting that you referred to the speech by Jared Kushner. The Palestinian chairman of the technocratic group spoke to the Davos.
Ali Shad?
Yeah, spoke to the Davos conference and spoke about how he understood the plan that was being presented. And he was giving his authority and legitimacy behind that. But I've got to be acutely conscious. Every week I have a meeting with our team who are in Gaza. Maybe every fortnight now because I'm away this week. And the very practical concerns of staying alive are still there because of the health
So given that so much is unknown and there is this massive gap between the immediate needs you're talking about and the ultimate vision as set out by Jared Kushner, is it the right moment for Tony Blair to back the administration's plans for Gaza?
You get him on your show. He's more than capable of talking for himself.
Will you put in a word? Because our request is in.
Of course, I'm very happy to do that. I'll say that this is definitely the sort of interview in which he would thrive.
But have you had a conversation with him about it? That's what I'm wondering.
I saw him briefly last week. He's been very, very committed for a very, very long time to the idea that there cannot be security for Israel unless there are rights and dignity and statehood for Palestinians. And there cannot be statehood and dignity for Palestinians unless there is security for Israel. So he'll have to speak about this. You'll have to ask him about what he's doing and how he sees it playing out.
Did you caution him? Because you have teams who are in Gaza. You are directly connected to living conditions for Palestinians today. Would you caution him in how fully signed up he is to the Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner plan, which he clearly is, because he said he believes in their work.
I say to him every time I see him, this is what we're seeing today. This is what we're seeing today.
And how does he respond?
He says, I'm on it. I want to hear it and I want to be on it. And I mean, that's the truth. So that's all I can tell you. He's got no official position. He's not, it's the Palestinians who've been nominated who are taking actions on the ground. But you need to get him on your show. He's got talent, that guy. You know, he's got a future ahead of him. So you want to go and get him on your show and give him a bit of a platform.
It's not for want of trying, I'll say that. The wider picture in all of this, he is on the executive board of the Board of Peace, which it feels like the Americans are putting forward as an alternative to the UN. Is that the case, do you think?
Well, there's the Gaza element of it, which was mandated by a UN Security Council resolution. That's got the standing of the UN behind it. I think we need a stronger UN, not a weaker UN. There are internal reasons for the UN, but there's also the point that the UN is only as strong as its member states allow it to be. The gridlock in the Security Council really since 2014, since the Russian invasion of Crimea, in some ways a bit before that, has undermined that institution. But I think it's still got unique legitimacy and credibility as an institution, and it's incredibly important for if the American anchor has been pulled up on the global system, we need to put out more buoys to stabilize the boat, and the UN is an important part of that.
But do you think the US is trying to circumvent it by setting up the Board of Peace, by inviting Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban, the president of Belarus, all sorts of people who you would not associate with the best interests of peace and security in the world?
Of course. Now, one of the things about running a humanitarian organization is there's impartiality, there's neutrality. I've got all sorts of things I've said in my political life about what I think of different of these actors. Leading a humanitarian organization, I have to stick to my lane. I know that the US administration have withdrawn from the World Health Organization, and I've said that's damaging because the US is a potent and positive force in global health. I'm not going to get into what might or might not, because the truth is, while the mandate of the executive board in respect of Gaza is quite clear, the wider debates in international diplomacy about what is the Board of Peace and how's it going to work, that hasn't happened yet.
Do you think Tony Blair knows fully what the aims of the Board of Peace
Well, he knows what his job is in respect of the executive, which he's on. And so, as I say, get him on. I'm sorry that I'm not interesting enough for you to have to ask what I think he's going to think.
Trust me, there's plenty in your ballpark that we're interested in. I do wonder, though, running a big international organization, your donors are crucial, right? Your work without them can't happen. USAID has been shut down. In the UK, a Labour government run by people you know well, your own brother is a senior minister in that government, is choosing to fund its defence pledges by taking money from the aid budget. What did you think when you saw that last year?
I didn't like that, obviously, and I said so. The needs that you've referred to that are on our watch list are growing, but there's been a 50% cut in humanitarian aid in the last year. That means lower food rations in the World Food Programme. It means we close a program for boys and girls to get educated in Afghanistan for 300,000 boys and girls. It means that Sudanese refugees in South Sudan don't get a health centre. So I can see what those cuts are doing, and the UK cuts are only just coming in. They're protecting Sudan, they're protecting Gaza, they're protecting Ukraine.
Are they protecting Afghanistan?
No. And so our program is massively diminished there. And so what I have to do is not just figure out, of course I have to figure out how does a $1.5 billion organization become a $1.1 billion organization. And we've had to do that very briskly over the last year. But I've also had to figure out with our teams, how do we remain on the front foot for the virtues of impact, innovation, cost effectiveness that make us a really potent force in people's lives. And that's what we're focused on. We're focused on the role of the World Bank, because that has a critical role in fragile and conflict states where disbursement is difficult. We're focused on the European Union, which has not cut its aid budget. It's interesting. They have 7-year budgets in the EU. They've not cut the budget running to 2028. And they're increasing the budget 28 to 35. So we need to make sure that their money is going as far as possible, including by cooperation with the UK. We have to make sure that organizations like the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunization, with whom we partner, they're taking the money as far as possible.
These are your friends in the UK government who are making these decisions. Sum up your emotions. Disappointment? Disgust?
No, they don't pretend that this is a choice that they wanted to make. They do it in sorrow rather than in glee.
And to keep the Americans happy, because the defense spending pledge is important.
Yeah, but I think the defense pledge that we're making is driven by the actions of Russia more than the actions of America. Let's be absolutely clear about that. In the 1990s and the 2000s, the ability of Russia to threaten European security wasn't understood in the way that it is understood today. But anyway, the point is, the government's done something that I disagree with, and I'm far from happy about it.
So what are your conversations like? Do you keep voicing it, or have you given
No, because there's still
up?
an issue how much of the so-called overseas aid budget is going on support for refugees in the UK. So defying too much. What I want to say to people is $2.10 to deliver a vaccine dose in East Africa. That's what it costs us. We delivered 24 million of those vaccine doses for $2.10. And I want to take on the aid doesn't work argument, because when you vaccinate a kid, 2 million zero-dose kids in 4 countries in East Africa, including Sudan, that's a life benefit. If you don't vaccinate that kid, it's a life sentence for them. Severe and moderate acute malnutrition. We've got 45 million children today who are severely or moderately acutely malnourished. We know how to address that. And by the way, we've shown how to address it with a 30% increase in cost effectiveness and cost efficiency. So my job is to say, here's an absolutely copper-bottomed investment that anyone would think is a good investment.
You speak so passionately about this, and yet I know there are congressmen in the US who've characterized the work of the IRC as theft and larcany.
Well,
do you get exhausted in the process of having to say these things and feeling sometimes
younger, so it's easier to what I'd say to them is, don't take it from me. Let's come and meet our clients. Come and meet our
but they're not going to.
Staff. Do I give up? No. Thank you very much.
I was wondering if you get ground down by it. That's really what I'm wondering.
No, I'm quite. Maybe that goes back to thinking that one's lucky rather than unlucky, and. If I was ground down, I wouldn't be learning anything. If you're not learning anything, you don't do it. You do jobs until you stop learning in them, I think.
You came to the IRC job with lots of experience in politics, right at the highest level of being Foreign Secretary, one of the greatest offices of the state. So as you look at the Labour government now, 18 months after getting elected, what is your analysis of what's gone wrong for them?
Well, first of all, I have to say, it's not all gone wrong.
You'd acknowledge that things have gone wrong.
It's been a very and period, of course, and there have been mistakes made, of course there. I think that the world has changed very, very fast in the 18 months, and the world has changed very, very fast since they wrote their manifesto. And when the world changes, you have to change, and that's the process that they're undergoing at the moment. I think that they're going to have to give clearer direction They're going to have to amp up the dosage on some of the interventions they're doing on areas like Europe. They're going to have to do more, much more.
To get closer to Europe.
Much more. And they're going to have to explain what they're doing. And when I was in politics, people used to say, if you're explaining, you're losing. I think Ronald Reagan said that. Now, if you're not explaining, you're not on the pitch. And so I think that there's work to be done, but I know them to be high integrity, very methodical, quite self-critical, and very determined.
Would you guard them against having an agenda set by reform? So they focus on the kinds of core issues for reform and the Conservatives, like immigration?
Well, I think without losing all of the audience who might have listened to me happily, I'll confess to being an Arsenal supporter. And Arsene Wenger once said that his philosophy of management was never set your game plan by what you think the opposition are going to do. Set the game plan by what you want to do. And so the Arsene Wenger answer to your question would be, you don't take your agenda from reform, you take agenda from the people you're trying to serve. That's where the agenda comes from.
But 18 months ago, you must have been so happy to see your party succeed,
I'm still happy to see my party in government because
but they're
honestly...
not doing well in the opinion polls. And if they continue to not do well, Nigel Farage could be the next Prime Minister of the UK. Would a new Labour leader make a difference to their fortunes?
No, I'm not going anywhere near that. We've got a Labour leader. He's fought and won a general election with a majority of 145. We're charged by the British public with delivering on an agenda that improves the country. And I want to come back to this point. When the world changes, we have to change. There's a lot of change going on. Take it from the Trump administration themselves. They've set out to have a revolution in global affairs. That means we have to do more for ourselves. It doesn't mean we break the American alliance, but we have to do more for ourselves. We have to do more with Europeans. We have to do more with Canadians. We have to do more around the world. Let's focus on our own agenda. What
did you think when they blocked Andy Burnham from running as a Labour MP?
I wouldn't have done that.
You wouldn't have done it? Why? Because it creates bad blood?
No, I mean, he's a talented leader, politician, and you want your talented people in the team, on the pitch, scoring goals, or if they're defenders, stopping goals.
I wonder where you see your home. Is it?
Our home is here.
So you're definitely going to come back?
Well, the trouble is you're not always living at home. That's the thing. So I still sound like an Englishman in New York, to coin a phrase. We make our own history, but not as we choose, as someone once wrote. And I feel very committed to the country, to this country. It's given my family everything as we started this conversation.
Has America...
Gave me Louise, so that's...
Yeah, your wife?
Yeah.
Has America felt like home in the last 15 years? I know your sons were born there.
It's been my home. Our kids were born there, were adopted there. And I first went to America in 1977 as a 12-year-old for a year with my family. I mean, the country is an extraordinary place. I mean, it's a teeming, thriving, driving, ambitious place.
And seductive, I would say. It's very easy to become attached to it.
I wouldn't say seductive. It's pretty,
tough place.
It's sincere. They're sincere when they swear at you in New York. So I think it's been our home, and I think that one has to have a profound sense of gratitude for for the life experience is given me. But you asked me a question. Where's home? And I said, well, here's home. So
what do you think your next job might be? Is it public service? Is it private sector?
Sometimes younger people than me come and say, well, and I say, well, careers advice hasn't been my strong point, I wouldn't say. I always say the same thing. Look, I want to make sure that I'm doing something that does the maximum to advance the things I believe in, consistent with the absolute loyalty and commitment I made to my family to be there for them. And you don't know what comes up. I haven't got a napkin with the dates and roles. So I feel very lucky to be leading the International Rescue Committee. I learn from my colleagues and from what we do. I put myself into it. And so I'm grateful they've put up with me.
And do you think is there something in politics that you ever yearn for, that kind of power, or is it part of your past?
Well, I always say to people, look, what's the difference between government and NGOs? Well, you have more power in government, but you have more blockages on doing anything about it. If you're in an NGO, you see the people. The danger is you lose sight of the big picture. Doing my job today, there are 34 million people last year who got help. Did I transform their lives? Did I find their husbands? Not necessarily. Did our teams give them vaccinations? Did they give them a chance in life? Did they deliver life-saving and life-changing interventions? Yeah, they did. So it's a balance, isn't it? And I don't know what my next job is.
Do you still talk to some of the people who you work closely with in exactly that period? Hilary Clinton was the Secretary of State at that time when you were the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, of course.
Do you still talk to her?
Yeah, of course. We don't just sit around saying, oh, it'd be much better in our day. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. And
you don't just say that. You do a bit of that, I bet.
Did I say we don't just say that, or we don't say that? So, of course, but I think that all of us want to have a voice in our own way. And I am lucky I can have a voice, but more important, our teams can do something. And if I can help them do it, that's good.
David Miliband, thank you.
Thank you.